Good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of Virtual Art in Focus. I'm Michelle DiMarzo, Curator of Education and Academic Engagement at the Fairfield University Art Museum, where today we'll be looking at an object that is on view right now as part of the exhibition Monuments, Commemoration and Controversy. So as always, I mentioned that if you are in the area, we really hope that you will come and visit us in the museum and see these artworks in person. Our wonderful producer, Jesse, is going to drop a link to the exhibition website into the chat. And you have until mid-December, so you still definitely do have some time to come and see this wonderful show. Our last Art in Focus looked at the painting that you're seeing underneath the exhibition title. But today, we're going to go down to the other end of the Bellarmine Hall galleries and take a look at the painting that is hanging over there in the corner to the right of the archway. And I'm seeing a little bit of a closer up. This is a painting by an artist named Stafford Mantle Northcote. It's Tong Yin Yee Shung Chinese Laundry, a painting from 1899. I should mention, by the way, that from our last Art in Focus, our chat window is back in action. So if you have thoughts or responses to the artwork as we're talking about them, please feel free to put them in, and then Jesse passes them along to me so we can make this a bit more of a conversation, even though it is happening virtually. Now, I set up the slideshow in this way for a reason, because something I realized as I was putting it together just yesterday, I was looking at this installation shot, which is from our galleries here at Fairfield, and I'm looking at the painting, and then I'm looking at this image, which happened to be the reference image that had been sent by New York Historical in advance of the show. And I realized, these are actually pretty different. If we look at the photograph of the painting as it is installed with the lighting set up as we have it, many more details of this painting become visible. Sort of the internal light of the painting really seems to arise in a way that it didn't from that earlier reference image. So the image that we'll be talking about is our installation photograph, just cropped to just inside the painting's frame. And as always, we were lucky enough to have a quick conversation about this in the gallery with a couple of our longtime visitors, Pat and Diane. And I did warn them and said, the things you say to me in here, they go on to the whole wide internet, because when I do the virtual art in focus, I'm just talking to a screen. So unless people are putting their comments or responses in the chat, like I bring in what our visitors have said to sort of enliven the conversation. So I said, you are YouTube famous or live stream famous, maybe without realizing it. I will address in a few moments why and where this painting fits into the show Monuments, Commemoration and Controversy. But as always with an Art in Focus, it's a pleasure to just sit and look at a beautiful artwork for a few moments. And something that I will admit that this photograph does not quite capture, but sitting in front of it in the galleries does, is the wonderful tactile quality of the paint, of the surface itself. Because as always, I'm usually sitting below it and slightly to the left. So for example, from where I was sitting in the gallery, I was admiring the very loose and painterly brush strokes at the sort of middle left edge where we see this woman standing with her back to us. And they're much more impasto and thick when you're seeing the painting in person. It's a little bit flattened by this photograph, but it's a good reminder of the sort of give and take. We have the wonderful opportunity to connect virtually through a live stream. We have incredible installation photography that can give us a sense of being in front of the painting. But there's that little added element that if you're able to visit the museum galleries, you'll get to check that out in person. In general terms, we are looking at an interior scene. We have 3 or 4, in fact, human figures. The woman standing to the left with her back to us, her face turned toward the right, where there are 2 men seated, one behind sort of a desk and one in a chair closest to us. And then just a distant silhouette in a back room with a curtain pulled up. And we know from the title that we are in a Chinese laundry. We know from more about this artist, this is a New York, this is Chinatown, 1899. But what I found really interesting from the conversation that we just had in the gallery, Diane and Pat are women of a certain age. One grew up in New Jersey, one grew up in Chicago, and both of them had the same reaction to this painting and why they found it pleasurable to look at. And that is, they remembered going to Chinese laundries that still looked very much like this when they were younger. And they were very excitedly talking to each other about the memory of getting the paper wrapped package full of carefully folded shirts, or in Pat's case, her her mother's tablecloths. She would be dispatched to the Chinese laundry in her hometown in Jersey to retrieve this package. She remembered that there would be a red tag at the end with the family's name on it. And what do we see stacked up in these very neat shelves in the background of this painting, but very similar packages like those. And for me, as someone who has only grown up really with the concept of either DIY laundromats or dry cleaners where things sort of go on hangers, that is not a world that I have a memory of. So it was really interesting to talk with them about what this was evoking for them. In Pat's case, she said it brought back the sense of mystery that she always felt on going into that place. She said she remembered that there was only one Chinese family in her hometown. They did not patronize any Chinese restaurants, so the only place she saw people of Asian descent was in this one place that she would be sent on these errands. And she mentioned she always remembered there being a sort of dimly lit back room, as we see in this painting. And she said in her case, usually there was cooking going on back there. And she said she remembered growing up in a white family with not eating at Chinese restaurants, that the aromas that were coming out of that back room were just truly new to her. And Diane shared similarly, growing up in Chicago, the sort of memories of the interior materiality. She said all of the red with the Chinese writing everywhere. And we see, although it is painted very indistinctly, because let's be honest, I'm not sure that Stafford Mantle Northcote, fantastic name. I doubt he was literate in Chinese, but he is trying to give us the setting in a believable way. We see these whether they are paper or they are fabric, adhere to the walls. They're on the blue curtain behind the seated gentleman, all covered with writing, and all in that very auspicious and lucky color of red. So that's where our conversation began in the gallery. And if any of you have similar memories, please feel free to jump into the chat and share them. And then we spent some time thinking about the actual elements of the painting and what the people in here are doing. For example, we were trying to discern what this woman at the left, who is leaning up, she's propping herself up on her tiptoes. She has yellow slippers on. And so it seems like she's kind of bearing down on something. When we were discussing, is she ironing? Is she perhaps using a washboard to rub fabrics against? And a little bit more legible in the gallery, but there is a suggestion of a pile of linens to her left, which made us think that, okay, maybe she is sort of using a washboard in front of us. Maybe that is a sink area. But without being able to see in front of her, it's a little bit unclear. One thing that I would say that this, I'm going to go back to our gallery view for a second, just to see if it's any different. No, it's still pretty much the same. Actually, I think the distinction of the brushstrokes is almost better legible here in this angled image of that pile of laundry than it is in the one that I cropped. But that could just be from the fact of me having cropped it down outside of its frame. There is an incredible glow around this woman that you imagine is coming from some sort of gas lamp that is burning in front of her and lighting up the entire room. We don't see any other form of illumination in this darkened image. And Diane had mentioned that, when she was growing up, Chinese laundries were almost always located in a basement level of a building. So she always remembered going down and it being darker than the outside. So there's just this wonderful warmth that permeates through the space. And then we did a little bit of joking about the fact that it's the woman who's doing the work and the two guys are sitting having a chat. It looks like the proprietor is the man in the white shirt who's seated. And on close examination in the gallery, again, these two older women and myself, what I was thinking of as perhaps a game board for some sort of activity on the table in front of him, they both immediately said, no, it's an abacus. That's how he's doing up his sums. And when you really look closely at it, it's like, yes, there were sort of the knobs and beads of an abacus. So again, one of the countless demonstrations of how fun it is to look at an artwork with several other pairs of eyes, especially ones that have had different life experience than you, that will just notice and hone in on different things. Impossible to see in an image like this, but the very tip of the very thin looking pipe that he has a red dot on it, because I thought to myself, well, it sort of looks like he's got his account books spread open in front of him. Could that be a brush with a tip of red ink? Or is it really a very, very fine pipe and there's a tiny dot of red flame at the end? And we couldn't really come to a consensus about it. And there were a couple other things that we couldn't quite come to an agreement on. And one of them, Diane brought up, she said, "What on earth is up with the bucket? Why is the bucket in the foreground, propped up on what looks like a box with something cylindrical sort of propped on top of it?" She said, "Why is that sitting sort of at the base of this triangle formed by these three people?" And I had to tell her, "Your guess is as good as mine. I do not know." And we also couldn't quite suss out what the object that the gentleman who's seated at our right with his back to us, what is this that he's holding in his hand? And I had first thought it was some sort of a hollow container because there's sort of a black shadow at the top edge. Pat felt very strongly that it was something that had been wrapped in paper and twine, and she reminded me that I am not of an age where I remember shopkeepers tying up things in brown paper and twine, but she could. So she said that she thought that might be what it is. But we have an impression, since his hat is on, that he might be either someone who's just stopped in for a chat, maybe he's waiting to pick up some laundry. And one thing that really made me realize that the photograph that we had, sort of the file photograph, was not really showing you some aspects of the painting is that in that version, it was very hard to make out his braid going down his back. You can see his braid, and the gentleman he's facing has the characteristic Manchu half-shaved scalp, presumably then with the braid going down his back as well, as would have been the fashion among many Chinese at this period, where in China, they're still at the tail end of the Qing dynasty. So much to see in this painting, I have to say. Pulling us back to our broader view, because one of our participants, Diane, she had said, she's like, "Yeah, I came because I really wasn't clear on what this painting is doing in this show." And I had to tell her that I think part of that is simply a product of how our show had to be installed with the constraints of the Bellarmine Hall galleries. You see that we have that big archway next to it. The way New York Historical presented it, the way Wendy Ikemoto had shown in her opening night lecture, which I will mention, is on our YouTube channel. If you would like to hear the curator of this exhibition walk you through her ideas behind these arrangements, I encourage you to seek that out. This came to us grouped together with the object, the very recognizable object in the case at your left, the painting next to it that has a brilliant blue seascape, the painting that we've been looking at, and the object in the case at the far right. And indeed, a pen and ink drawing that is to the left of the Statue of Liberty. All of those were grouped together under the name Statue of Liberty. And I think one of the things that drew me in immediately is like, I too, when I had just seen the list of artworks that were coming, wondered, okay, Statue of Liberty, painting depicting Ellis Island, a cane with symbols of abolition, a pen and ink drawing of the arm of Lady Liberty when it was not yet fully assembled. What is a depiction of an interior of a Chinese laundry from 1899 doing with this group? And there is, in fact, a very clear connection to what they're thinking of. And it all does have to do with Lady Liberty, because as I've said to people who've come through the show, it's one of the great joys of working in an academic art museum. You're always learning new things or being reminded of something that you had known, but maybe it's a bit of knowledge that has drifted away from a previous era of your life. And what their materials about this model of the Statue of Liberty, or its official name, Liberty Enlightening the World, is that when it was conceived and designed in France by the sculptor Bartholdi, it was originally conceived as a monument celebrating the emancipation of Black Americans following the Civil War. Like, it was intended to congratulate the United States on joining the rest of the civilized world in rejecting slavery. And indeed, an early design for it showed, rather than tablets under her arm, a set of broken manacles. So one of the ideas the exhibition is dealing with are the way that monuments, even those that we regard as really central to our American self-identity, like the Statue of Liberty is so central to who we think of ourselves as Americans and what it means. But the idea of it being connected to immigration and Ellis Island is something that we mapped onto the Statue of Liberty after it was created and installed. It was not part of the original idea of the sculptor overseas in France, which is fascinating because it reminds us of the power of these monuments to contain many narratives at once. But what New York Historical pointed out, at the time that the Statue of Liberty went up in New York in 1886, the US had already for 4 years had a law on the books prohibiting the immigration of Chinese nationals to the United States. It's called the Chinese Exclusion Act. It was the first piece of race-based immigration legislation this nation has ever had. And in one form or another, it remained in effect all the way till World War II. So I actually pulled this off the National Archives website, still working despite the current government shutdown. This is the actual recorded law of prohibiting the immigration of Chinese individuals. And at first it was just for 10 years, and then it was extended. And then, they kept making sure it rolled forward. And further developments required those living in the United States, for example, to register their domicile. They could not leave the United States to visit relatives in China without risking being turned away upon their return to the United States. They were also prohibited from obtaining American citizenship. If you're hearing echoes of the current world in which we are living, I don't think that was on the mind of the curators in 2021 when the show first went on view at New York Historical, but it certainly makes it relevant to the moment where we are in 2025. So in putting this painting into this nugget, this area of the show, or what Wendy referred to as her vignettes, it's a reminder that even as this statue becomes the symbol for welcoming waves of immigrants to Ellis Island and to the United States, and many of us have ideas on how fraught that has always been, making a really pointed note that one of the largest groups of immigrants had already started to be actively shut out and rejected. And the first group to receive that discrimination were Chinese Americans. It also put me in mind of an object that happened to be in our permanent collection, a gift from James Reed, who, as many of you might know, gave us a huge number of works on paper a few years ago. And it comes from Harper's Weekly from 1900, and it is a color woodcut on paper. This photograph is not doing it justice to the beautiful yellows of the color woodcut, nor the blue of the gown, and depicting the Qing ambassador to the United States, Wu Tingfang. And one of the things that caught my mind about it is that, for one thing, it's created just a year after Northcote's painting, 1899 for the painting, 1900 here. And I was reminded of it because as I was perusing the National Archives website, I caught that any Chinese individual trying to enter the United States during this period of exclusion had to demonstrate to the United States government and its officials, why they deserve to enter. And that included diplomats. So here is a gentleman who came. He was, I think, the first Chinese individual to pass the bar in England and be admitted there. Here he comes to the United States, and he would have had to prove himself to the satisfaction of the US government in a way that other diplomatic officials were by no means required. So it just made me wonder and be curious, which is, of course, the greatest gift that art can give us, about what was his experience of coming as an ambassador to a country that actively sought to exclude his kinsmen or his relatives, his countrymen, from coming, and then actively discriminated against the ones who were already in the country, and helping the country to run. Isn't that always been true of immigrants? They are doing a lot of the labor that perhaps the native-born sons and daughters of that land may choose or elect not to do. So if we're finding, again, this being redolent of our current moment in the United States, I think that is a powerful testament to how shows like this one are in many ways evergreen. You can always find something that relates to the stories that we like to tell ourselves about who we are and where we've come from, and also the offshoots of that story that ask us to look at the parts we might prefer to leave unexamined. If anyone has any comments or feedbacks, welcome to have you pop those in the chat. I know that I believe Jesse has put in a link to the Monuments website, and I would be remiss, we are live for those of you who are with us right now. If you want to come back to this space, the Arts and Minds Live at 5 p.m. this evening, we will be hosting a lecture by Kelly DiDio, an art historian from the University of Vermont, who is going to be talking also about monuments, but more focusing on monuments of the American South. So if that is something that you find interesting, we are not recording that lecture. It is a live stream only by the speaker's request. So if you're available at 5 o'clock, tune into this space and you can watch Kelly's talk. And if not, we hope that you might join us for a future iteration of Art in Focus or another program in the galleries. Monuments is up through December 13th, and we are free and open to the public Tuesday through Saturday from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. and until 8 p.m. every Thursday. So thank you for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.